So how do you feel people should approach your book today, and how is the intellectual dark web and a critique of the new right still relevant today?
Well, I mean, I think it is relevant, very relevant, arguably. But look, obviously, on some level, it's this we're in an extraordinary moment, and so I don't want to. I think there's direct through lines to understanding some of where we're at that are in this book, and the intention of the book was not just to be a polemic about a particular group of people. It was to use them as a launching point to make a bigger argument about the ideological failures of the time we're in and the weaknesses of the left, and then give what hopefully is a little bit of help with a new framework. So I think if you look at it as that, this particular exercise in self-branding, I think I'm actually quoting from my book, is already pretty much done. It was a flash in the pan in 2018. Now, that being said, I mean, all of these figures still certainly have influence and followers, and have real, they're famous, famous members of the pundit class. But I think the thing that I wanted to do in the book, and it might surprise some people, and I hope I pulled it off, was honestly, I mean, I'm happy to do videos about how silly and dumb Dave Rubin is. I think there was, particularly a couple years ago, it was very important to lay out some critiques of Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris and so on. But the real purpose of the book was actually to say what's interesting about this intellectual dark web is that, like they themselves constantly say, there is a little bit of intellectual diversity in it. And in fact, there's an intellectual diversity that covers pretty much all of the bad ideas and ideological frameworks that we could use today, from, let's say, the neoliberal center to the hard right. Another image I'll use in the book, which I think frames this, is Bhaskar Sunkara has a great a notion of Hungary station, Singapore station, and Finland station. And what he means, just really briefly, is Hungary is, say, that represents the Trump, Bolsonaro, Modi, Netanyahu world. That is the neo-authoritarian tendency. And that tendency is to some extent represented in the intellectual dark web. They would deny it fiercely, but there is some of the same preoccupations about immigration, about lost hierarchies, this type of thing. Then in Singapore, and again, this is a really, really broad way, but it fits, is the idea of let's have technical, scientific, and capitalist competence at the expense of democratic process. And that is certainly represented in the intellectual dark web. And then there in Finland station is, it's Lenin going back to the Soviet Union, and without litigating the entirety of Soviet history, which is obviously not the time and place, we can all agree that on some level, 1917 represents a human impulse to more broadly democratize our lives. And obviously, I think that impulse manifests in any number of ways, from general strikes to the freedom struggle in South Africa, to the social democratic agenda of Bernie Sanders, to the presidency of Lula, to indeed, the Cuban Revolution. And my book is an attempt to say that third option, that Finland station, is not, it's got some momentum, but it does not have the power in today's world. The world is really a contest in terms of governing between Hungary and Singapore station. And also we need to build a really successful Finland station project. And the last thing I'll say really briefly is what it attempts to do I'll just leave it like this, is also address why is it that in the pop culture, and this is, I think has changed in the last couple of years to some extent, but it's still a factor. Why do these arguments find such enormous weakness in sort of liberal terrain and what can be a deeply appealing answer that speaks to people's material conditions, but also has, by the way, a global answer, not just a one that responds in American terms, which is what most of these debates end up looking like.
Okay, welcome to Movie Night Extravaganza. I'm Forrest Miller, and I'm here with J. Andrew World, and of course, Zero Books publisher Doug Lain. So I wanted to start with that because, by the time this comes out, it might be a few days past this, but, on Tuesday was the year anniversary of Michael's passing, and I felt like, I felt like I needed to, talk about Against the Web with you a little bit and how that book came to pass because, number one, because Andy, of course, designed that beautiful cover for it. And because, I think for that book kind of gained momentum just as Michael had passed. And it seems like, it's really like blown up. Like so many people have read it, own copies.
Well, I can tell you how it came to be that Michael decided to write about the intellectual dark web. And how he decided to write a book for Zero Books. He, when he started the Michael Brooks show, apart from the Majority Report, he started to hustle, and he reached out to a lot of different people to get on their platforms and to make connections. And I was one of those people. I was really actually flattered that someone from the Majority Report of Michael's stature was bothering with the little YouTube channel and small imprint, and we became friends out of that. I mean, I had him on a couple of times, and I invited him to go to a conference in Boise, Idaho, on the topic of Jordan Peterson and trying to respond to Jordan Peterson. That I had been invited to, and then I invited him. And so it became a natural thing for him to write a book for Zero Books. That's actually one of the things I do with the podcast, and is I interview people who I hope I might get books from, or I try to vet people as to get books from. And so that's
an interesting way of doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. Like Todd McGowan was recently on the podcast, live stream or the video. He did a video with me, and he's going to write a book for us now. That's what came out of that conversation. So yeah, it's a successful. Michael Albert has written a book for us, and it started with an interview. So that's something I do.
He's a super interesting guy. I think the second episode of Ben's show that I live produced was when they went back and forth about participatory economics. And like the first question I jumped on in it, I think in any show and felt comfortable asking him about like what the actual political system would look like. And he was like, that's an interesting question. We'll have to figure that out.
Huh. Well, yeah, no, he's a long-term American radical. He's been around. He did Z Magazine. He was an editor at South End Press. He's friends with Chomsky. I'm really glad to be publishing his book, and it is on Paracon. But back to Michael, I suggested to Michael that he write a book about the intellectual dark web, because we had been getting some success on YouTube critiquing Jordan Peterson. There was a lot of interest in the intellectual dark web, and I thought he was the perfect person to stand up against Sam Harris, maybe in particular, and Dave Rubin. And he was perfectly positioned to launch a counter to the IDW. What happened was the book took a little longer to write than we did initially anticipated. So by the time the book came out, the intellectual dark web's day in the sun was almost over, and we were a little nervous about that. But there was a lot in Michael's book, and there's still a lot in Michael's book that's not just about the intellectual dark web, and his critique of the IDW went well beyond just critiquing the individual personalities, but it's worth reading, and will continue to be worth reading. But working with Michael was great fun. He was a little bit of a diva, but he was always making jokes that at my expense that I had to laugh at. So that so
Yeah,
I enjoyed
I
that.
kind of got the a lot of the technical side of his. I don't know if I'd call it divaness, but I was his YouTube guy, and I was his like editor. So like for all of the TMBS videos. So I kind of got like the everyday like all right, how are we doing? How's the analytics looking? How like those kinds of texts.
Oh
And,
yeah, no, yeah, right, yeah. I mean, it wasn't that he was difficult at all. It was just that he was really ambitious and
yeah.
really confident.
He had a healthy
And
ego.
yeah, he was. Yeah, no doubt, no doubt.
He constantly texts. He'd be like, "We're really doing this, bud. We're gonna get this." Like with a bunch of exclamation points. And I'd be like,
Yeah, right.
But the show was like taking off at the same time, so it's like a realistic confidence.
No, he was doing great. You know, the world was robbed of Michael Brooks, but Michael Brooks was also robbed of his future, and the realization of his ambition. He was going to go places. He was going places for sure.
And it feels like in a lot of ways, Against the Web is kind of a manifesto, I guess, laying out both, arguments against the IDW, but also how, like future groundwork for Michael's political project, which constantly was kind of in flux, I guess, as he, expanded his reading and like as he expanded how he was thinking about things. And he was someone that really could like absorb different ideas and make them his own in a sense of like he was never stuck in any, I guess, ideological like pigeonhole. Like his mind was constantly expanding and his ideas were constantly expanding, and I really like that about working on the show because there were times when it would just be obviously IDW dunking, but like more and more he would his like it was almost like nation by nation his ideas about like what each country in Latin America, for instance, or like what each country in Africa, like as time went on, as he met more people and had more conversations, it was constantly like a growing project, I think, in his mind, which you don't see very often. I think people get stuck in their ideological like an ideological bubble and they don't expand past it. Michael was constantly expanding past it.
Yeah. No, he was amazing. His book did well, and I think it would have done well regardless. But it really, it's troubling to me how at Zero Books we've had two authors become major sellers for us through death. That would be Mark Fisher and now Michael Brooks. And I'm really trying to come up with a better marketing model than having to have the authors die in order for their books to sell.
I'm getting flashbacks to that Saturday Night Live sketch where they were they had Dana Carvey was this rock star, and they're just like, okay, you see this chart? Look at how big Jim Morrison is after he died, but look at I forget the 70s rock star that they picked. Like, notice his career just like fizzled out right here. If he died, you know how big he'd be today. So our plan for you is to die.
Right. Yeah. But that's not the case with Michael. Michael was going to go out. He was not going to. This was just the beginning for him.
It also kind of, as the left kind of splintered at the end of his life, and it was, everything was like he had no, like I feel like with Mark Fisher, the whole like his mental health was obviously intimately tied with his work. Like as his depression got worse, at least from what I've read of his work, because I've read like a fair amount of it. Like as his depression got worse, his introspection about the left and like his work kind of got better, which is like, that's not really a model I think that's sustainable either. But
no.
But with Michael, this really felt like a beginning for him, and it's really as the left is splintered, every kind of leftist faction goes. I think Michael would agree with me about this. In this, and it's tough to see that, and it's tough to see that in like intra-left debates where Michael would have wanted no part in that. I'm like, like the truth is when things like like force the vote or something like that happened, Michael probably would have gave his opinion but not weighed in on individual personalities, and kind of as the careerist model of like, because I feel like there was a long time during the Bernie campaign where left media was kind of not harmonious maybe, but like all kind of shared the same set of goals. And as that's very much not been the case, and as like the incentives kind of take over, as in like people wanting to build their media careers and taking an ever shrinking, I guess, piece of the pie. Everyone kind of wants to claim people that can't say something for themselves now as their own. And it's frustrating to see that, I think, because I think in Michael's case, he would have wanted no part of that.
Yeah, you know, I remember talking to Derek Varn probably around the time that Michael's book was coming out, or maybe a little before that, and saying, you know, when Trump is gone, this big left media moment will go with him. and I think if Bernie would have won, my prophecy would have been proven wrong, that in fact the left media would have been absorbed and corporatized and institutionalized, and, you know, it would have changed. Everything would have changed. But I don't think that was ever really in the cards.
Yeah. I mean, there was a minute there where it seemed like it was a distinct possibility, but I also think that it would have been a little bit harder to, you know, as Bernie's agenda maybe didn't pass the way that it should, you know, with him in office, and as people started to kind of get disillusioned with it, I don't know if, you know, things would have splintered into factions that way too.
Oh, well, there would have been those who became White House leftists, you know, and would have had plenty of money, and there would have been a different floor and a different ceiling. You know, there would have been a lot more power on the social democratic left, and for at least a while. But maybe in 4 years it would have, you know, all blown up as Bernie lost for a second, you know, election, or died or whatever. But anyhow, enough of the alternative future. Let's talk about Local Hero. I want to talk about my movie. Rather than looking to talking heads and politicians, we can get a better understanding of the difficulty we're in by considering how this contradiction between tradition and progress appeared in art. For example, Bill Forsythe's 1983 independent film Local Hero offers a gentle and charming way to think through our collective and my personal conflict.
It was about an oil man, or rather a Scots accountant actually, who in his part-time had negotiated probably the best deal that the British National Oil Corporation ever negotiated. And it was just this weird idea that, and they used to have to break off negotiations while the members of his council who were farmers went off to milk the cows and everything else. And the idea of these Americans from, I think it was Texaco in that particular instance, having to sit around up in the Hebrides while the people they were negotiating with went about their daily chores, and then came back to the negotiating table, which was the village hall, I thought was a rich vein. And that's where we started.
In the movie, the fictional town of Furness is presented as a Scottish utopia. The people there are rooted to the land, to their history, and to each other. And while their world together is small, it is not parochial, but rich. The protagonist, on the other hand, is an oil executive from Texas. He's a jet setter whose apartment is set above the Houston skyline. He is cut off from himself and others. He is shown talking to his colleagues from behind glass. He is always on the phone. Read on its surface, the film is clearly a celebration of the simplicity of village life and a condemnation of the complexity and alienation of the modern world. But it is not just that. When taken in its entirety, the movie offers the viewer a kind of solution. The movie could not exist but for the conflict between the Texan oil man and the villagers. There would be no movement, no development, except for the starting point of modern alienation. And rather than suggesting that Furness is an alternative to Houston, by the end of the movie, we receive a moment wherein Furness is in Houston. We are offered the feeling of melancholy as a happy ending for the film. We are given permission to enjoy the way a rooted life is denied to us. It would be easy to decide that Local Hero is fundamentally a conservative movie. Its soft critique of capitalism not only relies on a fantasy version of rural life, but ends up as an ode to tourism. The last shot can be seen as capturing the rewards of a good vacation. However, on the level of affect, the film's compensations are, from my point of view, necessary. We need supplements like these as we lose our rootedness, as we contend with lifelong alienation. The culture war rages on, and Forsythe's charming little movie has largely faded from memory. And yet, the need for these sorts of supplements becomes more pronounced every day. And it's in this way that the culture war matters, and it demonstrates why both sides get it wrong. So what did you guys think of Local Hero?
I didn't start off enjoying the movie, but like as the movie went on and you kind of got the pacing of it, it was kind of interesting, and it was a fantasy film, really. It was a lot of Scottish folklore about the Silky people, or however it's said. I can't remember. It's been a while since I watched Song of the Sea, so I quite apologize for that.
I think that it is a fantasy film, but it also has a deep kind of cynicism to it. I think that we talked about the other day with, Repo Man, and we've kind of been having this like long-term conversation about this 80s cynicism, and also just in general, like as kind of we've made this turn towards neoliberalism, like the cynicism in general that, it's interesting that the villagers all want to be millionaires secretly. Like they're willing to give up all of those cultural elements for like a shitload of money, which makes sense because, it seems like their life isn't easy there. They're kind of just, everybody's doing every job in the town. It's like a really tight knit community. And like, but at the same time, like there's like that deep cynicism that you expect that there's going to be like somebody who's maybe holding out. And at first it doesn't seem like there is until, they find out finally that Ben owns the beaches. Like every single villager is just like, let's get this money. Like,
yeah. No, I mean, it's, that's one of the things it is very 80s in that way. I suppose Bill Forsythe, is an interesting director. He started as doing commercial documentaries, but scraped up enough money to make a feature film on his own for like a couple $1,000s with a theater troupe, and it was about working class kids trying to steal a bunch of rob a warehouse full of kitchen sinks and sell it in the black market to get out of their poverty. I haven't seen that one.
You got a Guinness Book of World Records record for it. I found last night. I was watching an interview with. Yeah, I don't know what the record was for, but that movie apparently like made one, which is kind of funny.
Maybe for the least expensive movie to do well. I don't know, something. But anyway, I haven't seen that one. His big hit movie that put him on the map was called Gregory's Girl, which is about middle class teenagers and a teenager named Gregory and his falling in love with one of his teammates on the football team, this woman, the one girl on the football team. And that's a charming little movie. Local Hero is, very much in line with the rest of his work, and so in so much as it's a the comedy is understated, it's a little bit cynical. There's a political dimension to it. There's a commentary on modern life. The thing that might be most interesting about Bill Forsythe is that he was not a movie person. Like he didn't come to the movies because he was in love with cinema. It was a calculated career decision, but he was mostly thinking of himself as a writer or is interested in literature. And so, I feel like when you look at Bill Forsythe's films, I'm not sure how interesting they are as films, but they're really interesting as stories, and I guess they're interested in theater, maybe even, as and narratives. I watched them when I was a kid. I was 10, 11, 12 when I saw Local Hero. So my connection to the movie is personal, and also it has to do with feeling like I was seeing something of quality, something that wasn't Hollywood, something that had depth to it, and I was able to understand it even though I was 12. Or it was funny and light. So yeah, found myself over and over again returning to Bill Forsythe's films. The other interesting thing about him is he quit. After he tried to go to Hollywood and make a movie called Being Human, starring Robin Williams, amongst other people, and that didn't do well, and the studio mucked about with the film, he decided to walk away from making movies. At least he made one other film after that, but he doesn't like making movies. But
there's a thing that I don't want to play it yet until we talk about the movie a little more, but there's a video I found from the BBC where he revisits the town they shot Local Hero in, and I think you can already tell it's kind of weighing on him because at one point the guy who's interviewing him is like one of the film guys for the BBC, who apparently is like really, really into it. Like he claims he's seen it like hundreds of times, and he takes him to the village that they shot it in. And he's like, this movie made me laugh and cry and for like the whole movie. And he's like, I hope I could do that again one day with one of my movies, but I don't know. Like you can tell, like, I think that the criticism, I guess, of it is kind of, or the criticism in general of his film career is already kind of weighing on him, I think, in that moment.
But this was well past the point. Was this like in the 90s that this was happening, or was this pretty recently that he was going to this town? I think it's pretty like in the last 10, 15 years, right?
Yeah, because it was the 25th.
So I don't think he has any plans to make any more movies, but maybe he does. But
well, the other thing too is the way the movie business has changed. I remember I was living in Baltimore, so John Waters was on a lot of my local media, and he was talking about how he just can't get movies made anymore because the studios don't want to produce something that's in that price range that he does. The mid-budget movies anymore at that point.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely a different. I mean, it was moving in that direction steadily since Jaws, right?
Yeah.
Moving more and more towards big budget. But now we're at a point where if you can't envision a franchise coming out of a movie, maybe it's not worth investing in or something. But so Local Hero is everything like today's like films that dominated by the Marvel universe is not, right? I mean, it's slow paced and it's small and it's not it doesn't have a very strong plot. The story is meandering, there's a story for sure, but it doesn't resolve exactly, at least not in any big climactic way, or
at least not in a way that we would feel resolved, like that is resolved. Like, it doesn't resolve in some big moment where he realizes things about himself, obviously, but that is kind of snatched away from him when his boss inevitably shows up, and then has a similar cathartic moment, I guess, in the space. But since he's the one with the money and like the power, is just like, no, you go back to Houston, and I'll stay here, and I'll fulfill my fantasy of creating this getting in touch with the sky.
The boss's ego is what stops the oil refinery from going in, right? He wants to see that get that comet named after him, so he has enough money to just shelve a oil refinery project and make his own little personal observatory instead. And it's like, is that really a happy ending? Well, kind of, but
I mean, depending on I guess for who, like, you know what I mean? Like, because I think that throughout the movie, like, I think different people have these, like, it's almost like this is like a fantasy, like a fantasy village where people kind of realize, what they wanted, and like they have these different moments of, like, when he's drunk and he's like, I'll take your life to the guy who's like, literally playing
it's Wedge.
Yeah,
that's Wedge from Star Wars.
So I think that
who is it?
Wedge, the X-wing pilot that's in all three of the original trilogy.
Oh, really? He's in this? Oh, okay.
Yeah, he's the innkeeper / banker guy. The one doing the
you wouldn't know that he was such a good actor if you'd only seen him in the Star Wars movies.
I know, like I'm watching this going like, why didn't we get like the Wedge solo movies in the 80s? Like that would have been freaking awesome. Having him be like James Bond in space. I mean, I'm sorry, but the little nerd in me was just died a little seeing how great he was in this film.
His character also has almost like a Monty Python-esque quality where, every time he walks into a place, the guy's working there and he's like, even like dressed differently.
Yeah. And he has a charmed life, really. He's got a great wife. He's got a nice community. He's the coolest guy in town, probably,
Well,
so.
one of him is. I don't know. It would be funny if like everybody like thinks that him like what his accountant version is cool, but like his like innkeeper version isn't. They're like, fuck that.
Or
guy.
I think you flip that. the barkeep version of him is cool.
Yeah. It also feels like everybody in that town not only takes turns playing every role, but like everybody takes turns working at the bar, because there's another guy that is working in like pretty much every other scene that is also a barkeep at
That's true.
And then nobody knows who the baby belongs to either.
That's right. I mean, the town is not utopia, right? I mean, it's despite with all its warts, it's a good place to be, but it also only works that way because of the context of the film, of it, the threat of it being taken away, I think.
Well, I think part of it too, just to me, and a very hot take here with the movie, is that they were all silkies, that they were all sea lions who shed off their skin, and were doing this to preserve the area in an 80s utopian kind of thing. It wasn't necessarily about the money; it was about not having the oil plant there, and it was this big master manipulation. Because at the end of the film, the town seemed empty. Was it because they all moved out because of the money, or did they all put back on their sea lion skin and return to the ocean like the?
Okay, did you forget to take your medication this morning? No, that's not what happened in this film. Okay,
you need to go back and watch it.
No. I've seen it lots of times. The last shot is also the last shot where the phone's ringing. Is an identical shot to when right before they first drive into town. So we're not meant to think that the town's abandoned. Okay. It's just that, no one's around the phone booth at that moment. And they're not all mythical creatures. The only one who might have been has a hint of the mystical about her is the marine biologist who, has webbed feet. But we're not supposed to think they're all from under the ocean or something.
I would say that on the beach, that guy has a little bit of a mystical quality about him too. Ben, I think was his name. Sitting on the beach and like having that connection to the land, that it's something that we talk about, like indigenous people a lot and connection to the land, but like at the same time, I think there's a Scottish connection to the land, like since they're kind of a Celtic descended nation of people, that there probably like there is this connection to the land that he has that is almost like indigenous in that way.
Well, I mean, the road signs leading in there too is also in Gaelic.
Yeah.
So
it's not one of his languages.
Yeah.
No.
Well, yeah, Doctor Who didn't have the TARDIS at the time.
Peter Capaldi is in it. That's I think his first acting role is in Local Hero, or one of them, because
he was a baby.
He was really young.
I love his running when he runs away, and he runs away like this every single time. I think it's also it's very interesting to me that they're all like, everyone in that village is willing to sell their property, pretty like almost everyone. It's like life is obviously like the Russia guy says, life is hard here. Like so for them, if you think about living there, if your family's lived there for a long time and you live there and you're kind of just living off of fish and the same like 20 people and you're kind of in the middle of nowhere and like people don't probably come through that town very often. They don't even seem to really have like a tourist, like they're not even like a tourist really hot spot. The only guy that really seems to come regularly is the Russian guy that fishes off the coast there. So I think they're willing to part with this with their village pretty quickly. But it's interesting that it's the Americans who come there kind of looking for conquest that end up being like.
Well, one American. I guess the boss too. Yeah.
Yeah. No. So, but those are the only two Americans that we really have any kind of relationship to in this movie. They both kind of become enchanted enough with it that they're like, because you think that you know, when the guy's like there the entire movie, you think that he's going to try to fight for it, and he doesn't fight for it, and the boss is just like, you know what, let's make an observatory instead and keep things. I really like it here.
Yeah.
It's an unexpected ending.
Yeah. What did you think of the psychiatrist in the movie?
It was Monty Python-esque again.
I came in here for an argument. Oh, I'm sorry. This is abuse. Oh. Oh, I see. That explains it. Yes. Oh, no, you want 12A next door. I see. Yeah. Sorry. Not at all. No, that's all right.
Yeah, I don't think the joke was set up as very well, but like once you figure out what was happening, it was actually kind of funny. I wonder if there's like a cut of this film where because I imagine there's probably some studio interference with some of the jokes didn't quite land necessarily, or they weren't like telegraphed properly.
There's some interesting or maybe inept cuts.
Yeah,
here and there,
and I don't know if it's the filmmaker or the studio because you can go either way without.
Well, I mean, it could be also that it's just well, no, I mean, I noticed it. Made my kids watch this movie recently, and that's my daughter's in town, so she came by, and my two sons are still living here, and we all watched Local Hero. And they were getting up and going to the bathroom or going to the kitchen, or they were a little restless through the movie. But my son Simon said this movie's moving really fast, which was not what I would have expected him to say. But what he meant was he said it right after there had been a kind of abrupt cut, and there are a number of those really abrupt cuts. There's one where McIntyre is explaining that his real name is Hungarian and he can't even pronounce his real name. It's not McIntyre at all. And his parents changed their name to McIntyre, thinking it was an American name when they immigrated. And that line said, and then it's a really fast, there's not a fade. It just cut. And there's someone talking. I think it's the psychiatrist, maybe. And he was like, "Oh, this is moving really fast." But what he meant was that the transition was really abrupt, and and that just happened. It doesn't happen all throughout the movie. That just happens here or there at the beginning. And I don't know if that was a stylistic choice or if that was a product of something being removed that the studio didn't like. I doubt that.
Or the studio said we need to make this you can't be longer than this amount of time, and they made a weird cut. Which
I also
think our sensibility has changed maybe because of the digital era we're in.
One interesting thing is that I guess they tested it in front of an audience, and so the audience talked to them about it, and they made a lot of revisions based on what the audience had to say about it. They gave them questionnaires. That was one of the things there's a making of documentary.
They made revisions. Did they say what kinds of revisions they made?
So it was like an hour-long documentary, so I didn't watch all of it, but
I'll have to watch that. Yeah.
It's on YouTube, the entire thing. But at one point they said that they had tested it in front of an audience and changed lines and stuff based on, because they didn't know how all the stuff was going to land with people. Since it's it's a very niche movie. It's not like you can make a movie and it's just people in Scotland watching it and they're like, look, that's my town.
But after Gregory's Girl, though, which did really well in the United States and all of Europe, but at least for that level of movie, there was a sense that Bill Forsythe could do this and cross over. That he wasn't just a niche director. He was a major director for in people's minds, because he had a certain amount of commercial success and a whole lot of critical success. You guys should watch Gregory's Girl and Comfort and Joy sometime but this one, Local Hero, is the best, I think, of his movies.
What about Gregory's Two Girls?
I haven't seen that one.
Okay,
That was 1999. That was after Being Human. I should watch it sometime, I guess. But I never really been into it.
Another thing that you did that you made I think a couple of videos on, and I know that Varn was thinking about a lot, was the when Can't Get You Out of My Head came out early this year.
Mhm.
And it kind of had that part where he's comparing he's comparing like the Scottish Highlands and like British, like when the British Empire kind of faded away, they started creating these stories that were like a romanticized version of what village life in England was like, and there were all those movies that kind of went around that theme, and it feels like this is kind of a subversion of that in a way, that like genre of movie, because it has that like idyllic like Scottish Highlands or Scottish coast, I guess, like almost like dream fairy tale quality to it. But at the same time, like you realize pretty fast that like these are all just people, and it's kind of cynical, and they don't necessarily want to be there if they could be anywhere else.
Right.
And,
It's
so,
have you ever seen the movie Brigadoon?
No.
Brigadoon is about a mystical Scottish village that only appears every 100 years or something. And the main characters, it's been a long time since I've seen it, but it emerges from the mist, and then you can go, and it's utopia. It's a beautiful, wonderful place, and a man goes to Brigadoon and falls in love and has to decide whether or not to stay in Brigadoon or not. But everyone there is perfectly happy, and so this was like a reversal of Brigadoon. I mean, he mentions Brigadoon, or Bill Forsythe does in some of the interviews.
I wanted to play this is my favorite scene in the movie, I think, out of everything.
Could you imagine a world without oil? No automobiles, no paint and polish, no ink and nylon, no detergents. Perspex, you wouldn't get any perspex. No polythene. Dry cleaning fluid. And waterproof coats. I think dry cleaning fluid out of oil. Oh yeah, I did not know that. I didn't know that. You know anything about the stars? Not much. Why? I want to check something out. I'll get a book or something.
I don't know. That was just I like that. I like that moment a lot, because I think that there's there's obviously heavy environmentalist themes throughout the movie, which I think precede a lot of like there's a lot of jokes about the oil industry, obviously, and how bad it is for the environment, because this is such an idyllic like coastline, and they're just gonna rip it up and drill for oil inside of it. So obviously that's the theme throughout the movie, but also just in general, these like beautiful vistas, like the beautiful like the beaches and the sky and everything, and they're just talking about oil, and like but also like there's an 80s theme of like people really couldn't imagine the world without oil, and they couldn't really imagine this place where like where things changed, because things just kind of felt the way that they were, and business was such a powerful force. And when people started really embracing that, it became for them almost like they could be walking past these beautiful things, and it's just like they're talking about business, and there's no real recognition that the coastline is so beautiful, and that this is just going to destroy it. Like it's just like, well, we need oil, and can you imagine the world without it? Like there's just so many things that we make from it.
But that coastline gets to him eventually. The beach and the water. He ends up collecting seashells by the end of the movie.
Yeah, well, that's the environmentalist part of it. Like but just that scene where they're just like kind of vapidly talking about the world without oil, as you see that that the cost of the oil.
No, it's a great little scene. Yeah, it's a great little scene. What's my favorite scene from the movie? I think I like the scene where they go up to the church, and all the the whole town is in that church, and the preacher, the priest comes out and talks to them, and he says, well, I will be as discreet. He says, the McIntyre says to the priest, well, we're going to buy this whole place, but be discreet about this. Don't talk about this. And he says, well, I'll be as discreet as the next man, but news travels fast in this village.
Yeah.
And someone inside the church says, what did what did the priest say? He said, news travels fast in this village.
And then they all go "I" or something like that.
Yeah.
But it's also interesting. They sent the priest out to talk to him, considering the priest is another person from a foreign country who's changed his name to fit in as a Scottish person. So in some ways, he's kind of the parallel character. Like, if Mac had just stayed in that town and if he had fulfilled his dream, I guess, like it seems like the priest kind of arrived there, and then as a young like priestly scholar or whatever, arrived there and then like never changed, or never never left, and it feels kind of like that moment where and he's changed his name to fit in the same way that Mac's family's changed their name to a Scottish name to fit in America. Like it seems like there's a lot of parallels between those two characters. Almost like he's an intermediary between like the village itself and Mac.
Yeah, but Mac doesn't get to stay.
Yeah. Well, then,
Mac has to go back.
He didn't earn it. I don't know.
Yeah, right. What would he have had to do to earn it to stay? He'd have to win a girl, right?
Yeah.
Or find God, maybe. One of those two things.
Or convince. I guess he could have fought for it and convinced his boss to find somewhere else to drill, but then everybody in the town would have hated him. It seemed like they were coming for Ben with like pitchforks almost.
Yeah, no, they were gonna tear Ben up. The townspeople were. They almost made themselves into villains. They were saved by the oil executive boss. They saved from themselves.
It also there's a weird moment where there's a weird switch, I'd say, in the movie, like a tonal switch, and that I found interesting, where they negotiate the deal, obviously, and then Ben won't give out, and it seems like in the beginning of the movie the innkeeper guy, it seems like he's like throughout the movie, he's very cynical. He's like, oh, I'm going to make a deal. I'm going to fuck over the Americans. We're going to pretend that we don't want to sell. Like, he's very manipulative about that. And then it seems like when the deal is finally made, he's suddenly extremely sympathetic to Mac and like their buddies. And they suddenly share the same goals and agendas. And they're all pals now. And it's like the villagers that are, when they start coming for Ben, like, they're kind of just like, oh, we should probably do something to stop it. And it's interesting that they're kind of teaming up, because it seems like throughout the movie, the innkeeper's looking down on him so much.
Yeah, well, it makes sense so that they would be pals once they got everything negotiated, right? Yeah, but and also, now the innkeeper needs McIntyre to help him with Ben.
Yeah,
I guess. But you're right. There is a tonal shift, and there's like, in a way, McIntyre's earned some respect, I guess, or acceptance. But it's short-lived.
He's gotten drunk with them at the festival. I don't.
Yeah.
He danced to the band and.
Yes.
He fell in love with a wee girl, a wee lass on the shoreline. You can't hate a guy for that.
Well, that's Capaldi, not McIntyre. That's the Capaldi character who falls in love with the mermaid.
No, I meant he falls in love with the innkeeper's wife and he said during that Stella or whatever.
Right.
He's like, I love Stella. Like, he's telling, which is that's also a funny scene, because you don't know whether the guy's gonna turn around and just punch him and like take the deal. And so he's like, let's trade lives. I'll just I'll take you. And he's like, all right, what about Stella? And he's like, oh, that's the thing I need to talk to you about. That's the thing. He's staying here with me, pal. I'm sorry. And he's like, oh, okay. And
well, I mean, that's like the first real human connection he makes in the entire movie is dancing with her, because the entire time he's like not able to interact with people properly. Everything was always just like there's like this weird wall of uncomfortableness. Down to like him eating the rabbit.
I'm going through a really bad breakup, and part of that was in my apartment, which I had to move back to my like parents' house. Like, my apartment, I had my pet rabbit, and I don't have that rabbit anymore. So,
I'm sorry.
My ex has it. So when I saw the rabbit, I was like, oh, it's a bunny. And then when they ate the bunny, I was about to start crying. I was like, don't start crying in the middle of this fucking 80s.
Yeah. I have to tell myself not to let myself slip into that kind of weeping and thrashing about.
So yeah, I mean, I think we've said a lot about this. I mean, I don't know if you guys have more thoughts you want to get into. I think
There's the one thing I wish I could really land on is why those films, and maybe it's just when I saw them, but why Comfort and Joy, and especially Local Hero and Gregory's Girl and Bill Forsythe seems like a significant bunch of films. Like he's a significant filmmaker, and like that it's like this is a classic movie, that this deserves to be preserved somehow. And I don't know if that's just my opinion or like just my nostalgia, or if I'm onto something there. But there's a charm to Local Hero that if you can meet it where it is, I think it will move you. I think it will get to you.
What do you think about the idea? I was kind of thinking about this. It seems like, I mean, I don't know. No one's really talked about this in terms of this movie that I could find, but I think the Thatcher era in the UK, like, which is like their version of our Reagan 80s. Like, I think the Thatcher moment started a little bit earlier there than Reagan's moment did. So, I mean, this movie seems like a product of the 80s era. Like, there's, interviews where he's talking about the excess that everybody's living off of, and really like just the nonstop consumption and excess and greed that kind of permeates throughout this era, which is something that really, is happening in the UK probably a little bit earlier, but still around the same time. Do you think that the reason that it seems like it has a lot more of a pertinent critique of those things at a little bit earlier than a lot of US films?
Yeah, no, I do think that he's very directly reacting to the inequality that is emerging in the late 70s and 80s. I mean, his first film, like when he talks about his films, he talks about them along class lines. And his first film was about really down and out Scottish youth. Like I was reading about it. There was a line in it. It's like, there's a whole scene where they discuss how they tried to commit suicide, and it's a comedic scene. It's like one of them says, well, I tried to drown myself with a mouthful of cornflakes. But he said, and then the final line in the scenes is, we've got to do something. There's got to be something more to life than trying to commit suicide. So there was a sense of alienation and inequality, and a sense that society wasn't really holding together and things were going off the rails that Bill Forsythe was definitely commenting upon, and that I think he felt and continued to feel really deeply, actually, as his film career sputtered. He became the films got darker, and Local Hero is a nice middle film where there's a lot of gentle humor and it's still charming. And
yeah, he said something about it in Criterion, I guess, decided that Local Hero was also good for preserving. Like, Criterion did a bunch of retrospective stuff on it. And in one of the interviews they're talking to him about, he says something about trying to think of how he phrased it, because I don't really want to pull it up and try to find it right now, but he phrased it like, people don't really notice how dark a lot of the themes in my movies are, and they get caught up in the idealized versions of things, and don't really notice that like a lot of the themes I'm going off of, even as some things are like funny and charming, are actually really dark. So it feels like he was acutely aware of that as much as and felt misunderstood. I think like his films kind of felt misunderstood, and probably as his film career sputtered, I could see how he would feel like he's someone that like never was understood as a filmmaker necessarily to start with.
Right. There's in the movie Comfort and Joy, which the movie Comfort and Joy is about DJ whose girlfriend leaves him, and who, because of that, gets involved with an ice cream truck war. He's following a girl in an ice cream truck, and that ice cream truck gets hit by a bunch of thugs in the other ice cream truck. So they come out, they're wearing ski masks, and they start pounding and beating it, just trying to destroy this ice cream truck. And it turns out it's like a mafia war between the different owners of the ice cream truck companies, and he gets involved. But in the background of that movie, there's always periodically radio audio, an audio track of the radio. He listens to the radio in the car. He works at a radio station, and it's always a terrorist bombing today in this part of the world. Bombs fell. The UN accused them of genocide. That's all in the background through this little light comedy about an ice cream truck war, and it that was so there's that was something that the brutality of the world and of the 80s, I guess, was on Bill Forsythe's mind, even as he made these gentle comedies.
He kind of does that in this movie too, with the environmental stuff. When we first get introduced to the to that oil executive, he's like, the film that they're watching, that they're making for the oil company, it's like there isn't much time left or something.
He says, we can do this in a little time because we all know that that's the little time is all we have left.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
And like that's the first introduction to this Texas oil company that you really get.
Right.
Which, I mean, after seeing the revelations about how long ago Exxon and all those companies were doing research into climate change, like decades before the general public knew about it, it's interesting to see, I guess, those kinds of environmentalist themes playing a role in a movie, that far back. I think. I mean, what was the ozone controversy kind of was in the 90s, right? Like, I don't think that was necessarily going on in like the 80s.
This is a little bit before the acid rain issue.
Yeah.
If I remember my timelines correctly.
Yeah. So it seems more relevant now than ever, obviously, as the whole world gets drilled farther and deeper than, that even then they thought was possible. But like a lot of the underlying critiques, I guess, of greed and of being willing to give up your culture, honestly, for that greed and the just the ruthless destruction of everything, kind of that is really it's a small undercurrent, like, in the sense of this movie feels very lighthearted and it feels very charming, but like that's definitely there, and those themes have gotten worse in the world in general, but like in our society and in British society and Scottish society, like really like the Western world, I'd say, much deeper now than they were even then.
I do kind of have a question for you guys. The Russians seem to be a secret capitalist.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And I'm just like, we're just basically saying that's kind of, is that and I might be using this a little wrong here, but is that like a type of capitalist realism that even the commies over there in the Soviet Union are all secret capitalists?
I think that, yeah, I mean, I think it was pretty. Do you remember the movie Network? Do you ever see the movie Network?
I've not actually seen it. I know of it, but I haven't seen it.
I'm going to read a line from the movie Network so I can find it real quick. In the movie Network, a big executive is lecturing a newsman about how naive he says.
I think didn't Stanley Spagowski, played by Richard what's his name from Seinfeld, Kramer, do a parody of that in the movie UHF?
And Ned Beatty plays the executive, and I'm sure. You're. So he says, Ned Beatty, as an oil executive, is telling Howard Beale, who's a newsman, not to be naive about his nationalism and his democratic ideals. And he says at one point, we're no longer living in a world of nations and ideologies, Mr. Beale. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business, Mr. Beale. And then this isn't here, but he says, what do you think the Soviets are doing in their meetings? Think they're reading the Capital or the Communist Manifesto? So no, they're bringing out their spreadsheets and calculating their, profits for the next fiscal year, just like anyone. So that's that I couldn't find the actual line here, but yeah, and that movie was in like 1976. So by 1983, most of the world didn't really look at the Soviet Union as something fundamentally different from any other nation. I mean, it was
except
there was
Reagan.
an ideological.
Reagan was the one. Reagan was the one man left thinking that the.
Yeah, okay, but I mean, and look, obviously there were Marxist sectarians who believed in the Soviet Union in 1983, and there were right wingers, but the kind of general consensus was that it was a bad place, but it wasn't bad in a different way than the United States is bad. Just worse, just worse.
And consumer goods kind of at that point were flooding. Like it wasn't by any means like the Stalinist Soviet Union. You know what I mean? Like consumer goods were flooding the streets, and like this because it's
flooding might be overstating it, but they had them. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's I don't know. I think also there's a thing about I like the Andy at the beginning you said that it's kind of like a fantasy movie, like a fantasy world almost, because it seems like this is the fantasy world in which Mac's character and like a random guy from the Soviet Union who's literal, like his fishing company is called like the Soviet Fishing Company or something, like can just kind of get along without discussing ideology, and they're all kind of just like just hanging out, and like because it's just at that point they're all meeting in this village that just it feels almost like a fantasy for everybody. And
he gets up there and he sings that country song too, the Russian, which was brilliant because he sang it like a true Russian would.
Well, they're all rudderless, right? They're all home, like not homeless in the sense of like they're all homeless in the sense of like they don't have a homeland necessarily. They don't have a place where they feel like is home, so they're kind of all rudderless individuals.
No, but they do have a place, and it's Furness. They have that place that they're in. That is their home, but they're willing to sell it.
Oh, I'm talking about like these characters like Mac and the Russia guys. Like, oh, I'm very rarely back home in Russia. Like I'm usually
but he's at home there, and but once he's there, he's in a home, and Mac is in a home when he's in Furness.
No, so that's what I'm saying. Like these, they all kind of find that home in this place. Like everybody can find a home in this village. It seems like. Because obviously like that the really egotistical boss finds his like one more thing I want to say before this is over actually is that he has these weird parallels to Trump that obviously weren't written intentionally, but there's Bill Forsythe, I guess, when the Abernathy thing happened where Trump was trying to start that golf course, that controversy where he didn't pay anyone in Scotland for that golf course. He wrote a thing about how the boss in this movie reminds him of Trump because he wants to put his name on everything. He's really upset that the company doesn't have his name on it, and he's really. And then you see the street corner though, and the street that the business is on has his name on it. So he noticed that, and he said that Trump even stole the coat from the guy. but so I think that the whole thing about everybody being kind of rudderless in this like in regular life, like what I mean, like the 80s have taken a toll on them to the point where like business is their life, like he's jet setting, and the Russian guy is just kind of like floating the seas, and they kind of find this weird connection, like anybody almost it feels like can find a connection, the African priest, like everybody can find some kind of connection with this village when they're kind of people that don't necessarily have an anchor anywhere else. And so there's that cultural values thing where it's like they can all find a home within that culture, even as the world changes around them. But then at the same time, the villagers are just kind of willing to sell their culture and their home away. Like it seems like everybody who gets there is way more likely to fight for it than the villagers are.
Yeah, so
my uncle was a commercial fisherman. And one of the things he always loved back in the 80s was being able to meet up with the Russians out there because like they wouldn't see each other for anybody for a while. And so before they left, they'd bring like a big stack of blue jeans and like whatever else the Russians wanted, and they'd get like bottles of vodka and like all this like little Soviet knickknack. And so my cousin's actually, I was always jealous of my cousin, having that tanky look in the 80s with all the Russian knickknacks.
Well, listen, guys, I gotta run, but it was great talking about Local Hero.
Yeah, let's we should do another one of his movies sometime.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, it was great. It was great. I enjoy this kind of thing. I'll talk to you guys later.